being added. And one of the problems with the original drawing or concept from from our planner was that the construction as proposed of the roof, the size and dimension of the roof trusses would have required some additional foundational work, which would have pushed it outside of our scope. So when Dave brought in his architect from Wade Trim, the fellow proposed some other ways that he could add that space that wouldn't require additional foundational work.
So that being said, once again, we go back to that meeting, I think I was when I'm saying we're wasting our money on these other plans, which it turns out we did. How many times do we do that where we spend money, we get these plans, and then when it comes up, now we're doing something completely different. But that being said, I don't understand $8,000 for engineering for mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. I don't see the size and scope of this project as a big office building. You're building it from scratch. I don't know what we're paying $8,000 for. I think that any electrician or plumber or mechanical person could look at what we're doing and say, hey, they just do that as part of their bid process. I don't think that building is anything complicated about it. I mean, it's just sort of a shell, and
Sure, well, maybe.
you run some ducts this way, and I'm not a heating, cooling, or electrical guy, but it would seem to me that any one of those contractors certainly could just figure out what they need to run based on that building.
Well, I
Okay,
think
maybe-
that we're looking at engineering for three different trades. So, I mean, if you break it down that way, it's really not that much
But maybe it's fair for us
less than
to ask,
$3,000 a trade. I mean, it seems like it's pretty reasonable to me.
maybe we could ask Mr.
I'm just
Newman.
asking about the duplication of work. Because if you're a mechanical contractor, like we did the fire station,
Right.
and the fire station is probably, and that station's a lot more complicated than what's going on at the senior center there. The guy came in, he gave us a quote, he did the engineering himself.
That-
I guess that's what I'm asking.
I think Mr. Newmer's gonna be able to better answer it, but that's one of the drawbacks of the CDBG type of funding, the federal funding, is you have to go through all the hoops to get all this plotted out.
And they-
As opposed to, you might be able to do that in some other instances at the fire department, but at federal dollars, they wanna see the plan complete.
Right, but why don't we? Why don't we ask Mr. Newmer to
Well,
comment on that?
that's an answer.
Yep, yeah.
Yeah, members of the board, like Mr. York, I'm not a mechanical, electrical HVAC guy either. That's not my specialty. A lot of the architectural work is being handled through a sub-consultant who is the architect who does a lot of that work in particular. I can tell you, when we did go out and review the building and look at it, the comments that he made were the things along the lines of, the existing furnace that's in the building is sized sufficiently for the building that you have. We're gonna be pretty much doubling the size of the building, which means we're adding a second furnace. So we're adding in a whole nother heating system and a whole nother cooling system for the additional space that we're providing. We have to calculate hot water requirements. The hot water requirements, as I understand, are different, especially as you go up in occupancy load in the building. Some of those things are related back to the building code, which, once again, I'm not an expert on, but those are the things that the architect was talking about when we had our meeting. So those are the types of things that we're looking at here, when the architect provided to me, those numbers.
I seem to remember from that meeting when we were out there also that the direction that we're looking to expand the building is part of the area where some of the existing utilities come into the building, so there's a need for some relocation of utilities and compressors and so forth.
Yeah, the existing electrical transformer and the compressors for the air conditioning units are on that side of the building where we're expanding. And that's part of the cost of the project, is looking at those. I will tell you, I've seen some concepts and some additional drawings come back from the architects and preliminary work where we're looking to work around those so we don't have the expenses of relocating those, but those are some of the things we're still looking at.
Okay.
But you're right, though, if we do end up having to move those, then that's additional work that has to be included in the plan.
And
But that's a different question.
Right,
My, once again, $8,000 to pay for something that the contractor clearly does and does on a daily basis. When they build my house, you have a schematic for a house if I'm a builder. I'm not, but if I was building a house, you call a heating contractor, he comes out, he looks at it, he lays out all his stuff and says, well, Mr. York, it's gonna be about, whatever, $20,000 to do your heating, cooling. You call the electrician, he says, well, we're gonna do a lot, you know, whatever, outlets, this is how much wire I have. I don't understand why I'm paying $8,000. It just seems like it's a double dip to me.
Part of it is, and just to echo what Mr. Capral had suggested possibly is the case, when we go through this approval process, the county contracts with an outside company to review these. They have to go through and know exactly what the project is. This money's not easy to spend. I would much rather prefer to do it your way. I think you end up paying the same one way or the other, whether you pay up front to do the engineering or the guy who comes out and bids it and goes, I'm at $1,000 because I have to design this at home. I think you pay for it either way. I think it's I think what you're suggesting is a better way to do it in the end, because I think the guy gets out there and gets his hands on it, knows what he's doing. But unfortunately, with the federal money, our hands are tied. We have to jump through their set of hoops to be able to spend it. If we don't want to spend it, then we can say we don't want the remaining $238,000 and say, yeah, this is too much effort. But those are the hoops we have to jump through to spend this federal money. This money comes out of that, but we just. I don't like the process that we have to go through this block grant money. It's silly that we give the government our money so they can give it back to us with so many more strings attached. It's silly, but if we want to be able to spend it to do this very worthwhile project, we got to jump through their hoops.
Well, I guess I'm asking, I don't understand what the difference between architectural services for prepping construction drawings, which I would think would have the heating, cooling, HV, plumbing, whatever, on that, and then have a separate line item for mechanical, electrical, plumbing. I guess that's where I'm having somewhat of a disconnect. If I call an architect and say, hey, design whatever this building for me, and he says it's $5,000, he's not gonna he's gonna have the
Yeah, but I've-
HVAC, the plumbing, whatever.
I've talked to numerous tradespeople doing different projects, and they go, yeah, the architect was an idiot. He doesn't know anything about HVAC.
That's
He put
even,
a
that, you're making my point even more. That's exactly the way these guys operate, and they sort of work on the fly as their builds. I mean,
I think our own building department requires a separate heating plan. So right there, you have to have a separate heating plan. That's required by our building department, which we still have to follow all those building codes.
well, the heating plan is
No, it's not part of your print, it's a separate heating.
Well, it's an R value.
So
You
again, I
go
don't
on
want
the
to
computer.
get into the debate about what we need or what we don't need, but there are certain things and requirements you need today to build, especially other than residential, that you typically do not need, or that you typically do need, if it's a commercial building.
Or publicly occupied building. Mr. Newmer looked like you might have had a comment.
Yeah, there are also different licensing requirements that the state has for these. For example, most architects do not also have the engineering certification and state licensing that's required to put the heating and the HVAC units together and to specify and design those. A lot of times architect firms, if they're large firms, they may have engineers on staff that do that. For example, at Wade Trim, when we do public works projects, we have some mechanical engineers on staff, electrical engineers, who do those aspects of the projects for us, and they sign off on those parts of the projects. When we get to this, the architect that we're working with is a smaller architect. He's less expensive because he's not a big guy, he doesn't have a lot of overhead. But he then uses sub-consultants or subcontractors that do that specialty engineering for him that have those certifications. For example, my engineering license wouldn't allow me to design a heating and cooling system for this building because I don't have that specialty in that background. So you have to have somebody that does. So in this case, the architect signs off on the architectural portions of the building. The mechanical, electrical engineer signs off specifically on those pieces of the building. And
So we're
then
doing
the
this
plans
because
come
of the
together.
CDBG portion of it. If I was doing this project myself, I probably wouldn't pay that, but.
Certainly, if the funds weren't restricted, then we would have a little more latitude in how you might source the work. I mean, there have been projects where I want to say it was a force account, but there's other ways that we can spend money, but CDBG funds are definitely much more restrictive, and the steps that we have to go through are a little more thorough. And it is complicated by the fact that it is a public you know, a public occupied building. The effort that this addition will require is definitely a greater scope of work than what was required when the building was built originally, because of some of the changes.
Well, there's
in
not
those
much
codes.
to the building. It looks like a prefab, almost a prefab structure building over there that was put up. To be honest with you, there's nothing expensive about that building. But I would like to say, and I'll just make this last comment, and, you know, I guess I would like to see this plan come back to the board so we can look at it. And I'll just say this, I'm not opposed if this project goes, you know, $40,000, $50,000 over budget, to finish it 100%, then, you know, I'm all for doing that. I'm all for finishing the project and not, you know, especially in government here, if we start something and we say, oh, we're gonna just do 80%, we'll come back to it later, we never come back to it. If you're gonna do it, let's just do it right the first time, and if we have to spend a few dollars, which we really don't spend that much money over there, if you look at it. In
Right.
last 10 years I've been here, we haven't spent hardly anything over there. I mean,
Well, and to your point.
that's my point.
Right,
you
no,
know?
and I agree. I might restate it. I wouldn't say if it goes 40 or 50,000 over budget, because that sounds as if somehow when we sourced it, we didn't source it properly. But I think, for a point of clarification, because I don't want it to be misunderstood, if when we get done with looking at this plan and the scope of work, and it comes back that the construction costs, in order to do, you know, for example, to reprogram the restrooms properly so that the seniors that utilize the building have, you know, an easy time, they're not complaining to us saying we have a hard time getting into this particular restroom. If that requires a few more dollars from the general fund, I think I'm echoing that. I just didn't want to say over budget as if to say, well, if we get in and everything over budget. I just wanted to clarify that.
No, I guess that was bad wording, and when I
That's
said
all
that,
I-
I know
yeah.
it was bad wording. I'm just saying, let's just do it once and
Do it right.
You know, if, like you say, if you need a few dollars more to do the bathroom, just bring it back to the board and let's look at what we got, and, you know, let's just do it all at once.
I'll make a motion to contract with Wade Trim for design, engineering, bidding, and construction management services for the Tucker Senior Center expansion project at a cost of $25,250 as presented.
All right, we've got a motion by Mr. Tominello. Is there support?
Support.
Support by Mr. Brado. All right, we've talked a fair amount, and I see there's some interested public comments, so how about if we open up the floor for public comment?
William Bardell, 18-year resident, 37-year skilled tradesman. Now, what I want to say is, are these Fred Flintstone drawings? You can build those drawings for 25 Gs and have your management team out there overseeing the job and have your Wednesday progress meetings after lunch for the same price. I ask you, is this Fred Flintstone stuff? You should be able to 25 Gs, slap it on there, give it to your general contractor. He shoots it out to your plumbing contractor, your HVAC contractor, your carpenters, Alberici, your plumbers. If we're paying 25 Gs for Fred Flintstone drawings, we're getting ripped off. Let's save ourselves $15,000, $10,000 for Fred Flintstone drawings, send it through to the state, get your grant, and go about your business. This is a rip-off. If you guys can't do the drawing, get someone who can do the drawing. Now we're shooting ourselves in the foot again. We always Band-Aid, Band-Aid. Let's take care of the junk before it happens. Shoot ourselves in the foot again. $10,000 Fred Flintstone drawings, okay, send it to the state. For $25,000, you should have your management team overseeing your Wednesday progress reports after lunch, weekly safety meetings, etc., etc. Putting a wall with a girls' bathroom on one side and a boys' bathroom, that's 8th grade shop. Everyone knows that. Gee whiz. Big deal. Come on, get some engineers out there. If you can't do the job, don't do the job. What are we paying you guys for? Fred Flintstone drawing, $10,000 done. Not $25,000. Save $15,000. Shoot ourselves in the foot again. I mean, You should be able, for those drawings, you hand them in, hand them to your general contractor, build it. If the plumber contractor don't like it, you take it back, you initial it. Here's the correction. You make a copy of that, he signs it, you initial it, sign it, date it, boom, do it, build as you go. I wouldn't pay $25,000 for Fred Flintstone drawings. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jim Sunstock, 31698 San Juan. This has been a recurring theme with me whenever we're dealing with Wade Trim, but I'll bring it up again. When you tell me that you need $25,000, $25,250, and you tell me it's for architectural services, engineering, bidding, construction administration, when you tell me that, I want you to tell me how many hours you're gonna put into that, and how much you're gonna pay that person that's putting it into it. And when you see those numbers, all of a sudden, $8,500 don't look right, because there's only two numbers there that multiply. So if one is way high and one is way low, or vice versa, they don't work. Is this 100 hours to do that? Well, let's see. So that's $85 an hour, right? Is it 10 hours to do that drawing? Now it's, whoa, $850 an hour. That's the problem. Of course, we don't really care. I know you guys don't really care, because after all, it isn't your money, and it's the government's money. It's the federal government's money. It's pretty interesting to me that we're going to spend over 10% of the money allocated to this CDBG grant of $228,500. We're going to spend over 10% on engineering, architectural services, blah, 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 blah. You know what? I think that you ought to be bidding this out. He gave you his number. Now go see if some other company will do it for you better at a better price. Because I'm going to tell you right now, I could look at those numbers and tell you that you are getting screwed. You don't want me to be looking at his numbers, because that's what I did for a living for years. And I'll tell you what, I've seen this kind of crap forever. You guys just keep spending the money. Just keep spending the money. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other public comment, we'll close the floor for public comment and move back to board comment. At least as a point of clarification, there are some additional things that we are required to do on these kinds of projects. And at least as an explanation for the residents, one component in this is, as an example, we have to go through a process regarding prevailing wage, whereby we interview everyone, or someone interviews the people who work on the job and basically does a wage study or wage analysis to make sure that the wages that are being paid on that job are the wages that the federal government deems are the appropriate level of wages, so that I guess in a manner of speaking, on a project like this, the Davis-Bacon Act says that the people who bid on this don't have to be union contractors, but they have to pay a rate that is reflective of what union prevailing wages are. So literally, Wade Trim, in the process of managing this, and the type of contractors that bid on this, that bid on federally funded projects, know that they have to have a person who goes out and surveys the people who are working on the job, saying, what is your title? What work are you performing today? Okay, what are you being paid? And is that amount that you're being paid at an appropriate or above an appropriate level based on the federal government's guidelines for what a prevailing wage is? So then the contractor also has to have someone that goes through that process and knows that they have to go through a payroll process to establish and verify all of those numbers. So that's what refers to CDBG compliance. Normally, if we said, well, we're going to hire a contractor, they're going to go out and do the work, I ask for 3 bids. Whoever's the lowest bidder gets it. I don't care what he pays his guys, but that's not.
Go through the federal government.
That's a good question. Yep. No, I understand. That's a good question. It's a great question. The federal government, normally we ask folks to come to the podium, but I'll answer that. No, it's okay. Yep, your brain's exploding. Yep, nope, that's a fair question. Just like you, everybody here, we all pay federal taxes, right? So certainly the federal government collects taxes. They then collect those taxes, and a certain portion of them are through, I believe it's through HUD, are set aside in CDBG, the acronym for Community Development Block Grant. This would be housing, and it's specifically low income. So the federal government collects our tax dollars, and one of the things they do with those tax dollars is they return them to communities in order to improve housing or living conditions for certain low income areas. So when we do a census every 10 years, they basically look at our community and they say, all right, well, how many people live there? What's their average wage? What's the, what's the neighborhood's income level? And if there's a section in a community that falls below a certain, not necessarily a poverty level, but at a certain income level, the federal government identifies that as a low income area, and they say, okay, maybe you have 20% of your population is low income. We're going to give you a certain sum. If 80% of the population was low income, we'd get a much larger grant from the federal government. So in this case, we get somewhere around $90,000 a year. The county says we're going to hold on to your money for 3 years. We're going to give you $270,000. We can take some of that money and give it to certain organizations that provide benefits to homeless people. We can use some of that money to pay for the shuttle that drives seniors around. Mostly, or typically, spending money on programs that cater to, say, senior citizens, that's perceived as saying it's available to everyone, including, in many cases, a low-income segment. So we get this grant. So the federal government says we took all your money, or took, not all your money, I guess, but we collected your taxes, and we're going to give you $270,000 back, and we want to tell you that the money that we taxed you on, that we're going to give back to you, must be spent on low-income projects. And you don't get to spend it how you want. You've got to jump through all these certain hoops. I know there have been studies done that say what the effectiveness is, but in essence, what they've done is they've collected $1 of tax and gave it back to us and said, here's some of that dollar back, and we want you to spend it in such a way that you're going to get about 70 cents return on that dollar that you spend, because we're going to pay people to you're going to have to pay people to ask everybody what they earn. It was presented to me by a contractor one time that if I'm doing a cement project and I've got a young fella that I hired and he's just a general laborer and he has no skills, but he's a good guy and he wants to learn the trade, he shows up and I say, today I'm going to teach you how to be a cement finisher. Well, immediately I've got to pay that guy what a cement finisher pays, even though he's never finished one patch of cement in his life, because he's technically finishing cement, so he's going to be paid the prevailing wage for a cement finisher. And that becomes very difficult. I've also heard from contractors that do this work that say, yeah, we've got two different ways. We do a CDB, a Davis-Bacon project, but then when we know that the funding isn't Davis-Bacon, we know that it's quoted differently and we do the process different. Whether I like it or not, those are the rules. So we could say, to heck with it, we're not doing it. Well, then we'd lose out on $270,000. Unfortunately, the strings that come attached to this require us to do a lot of additional things. It isn't, though, that we give the money to the federal government by choice. We pay the tax, then Congress says, you know what, why don't you spend some of this on low income? The senior housing or the senior center is one of those areas that we think touches as many residents and it satisfies that low income requirement. So either way, the point is that some of this construction administration, the bidding assistance, it's a little more complicated to go out for that. We don't have somebody on staff that knows all of the laws related to the Davis-Bacon requirements. So we contract with our engineering firm. If we were doing this project, I think it's safe to say that the $25,000 figure would be lower if it wasn't a federally funded project. I'm not commenting to any of the residents' concerns other than to say that some of the things that we do have to do through this, for example, you discussed attend project meetings approximately once every 2 weeks, assuming an approximate 15-week construction period, review the submitted bids, conduct CDBG wage interviews for prevailing wage certifications, and a project closeout documentation. So some of these things are additional things that drive this cost up and also end up driving up the actual cost once the construction work is bid. So, at least an explanation. And can I ask, are they Fred Flintstone drawings?
I guess I'm not really sure what Flintstone drawing is, but they are professionally done architectural engineering drawings that are sealed by state licensed professionals.
Gotcha.
So,
And in addition to the preparing the drawings, there is construction management, literally oversight of the project and administration of the project.
yeah, the resident made comment that that amount of money should include the project meetings and the management and oversight, and it does.
Right,
That's part of the scope of the project.
gotcha. All right, further discussion, board members?
I have a question, Mr. Supervisor. So the grant is for 228,000.
Well, it was more than that, but we've allocated some money to some charitable organizations, shuttle buses and so forth.
At what point will we see a projection of the total cost of the project? There has been some discussion about possible overruns and what we might do to accommodate that. And all I would say is, at some point, we obviously want to see the total cost, and I would hope that we could bring the project in somewhere close to what funds we have available, rather than simply assume that, not assume, I don't mean that, to attempt to avoid any significant overruns.
Correct, absolutely.
To be able to scale the project to
Yeah.
meet what we have allocated to it.
And that was definitely our charge to Mr. Newmer
Okay.
and the architect when we met out on site, just to get this bid done. We probably spent an hour and a half, 2 hours out there going through the project, explaining the grant monies that we do have, the board's desire to stay within that.
Okay.
When we go through the bid process, and we'll have a much better idea as to, that final cost, and we can make a determination then. We had talked about during the project, maybe to say, when we prepare the bid documents, we say, give me, break out the way the bid's price, so there's an A, B, and C price, so maybe we say, this A is the meat of the construction, the stuff that needs to get done. And we know what we have to do that. And maybe there's a B and C option that's really nice to get done, and then the board here, after we get those bids, can make that determination to say, you know what, we're gonna dedicate general funds to cover it if it's over and above what the grant is. So we'll see that after we do the bidding to come back and make that final determination.
But along those same lines, and perhaps to the residents' comment, so we've got $228,000, right? And we're gonna spend about 25,000 of that for the engineering, the oversight, the management of that, leaves about 200,000. I would like to see about $200,000 spent through that CDBG or Davis-Bacon process. Now, obviously, we can't go back to the county and to the federal, through the oversight of the federal government and say, well, when we're done, we're gonna have some walls, but they won't be finished, because that's not a finished project. So, one of the discussions was, say, for example, if we were able to frame certain things in and satisfy the project and finish it, and then, let's say, for example, the common wall that's between there, if we said, well, now we wanna add a series of French doors so that the space could be opened up and be joint space, or it could be separate space, let's say, we might say, well, don't put that in the original price, because the cost to install those French doors or some moving wall or some partition will be a lot lower if we just source that using general township dollars, as opposed to including it in the scope of the work for the CDBG project. So to your point, if we approve this, we're gonna kick off Dave, and he can comment maybe on, what the time frame is before we're gonna have some bid documents. But we'll have a chance to kind of look at those plans, review those, and see, all right, maybe we can hold off on doing some of that work. For example, maybe there's cabinet work in the kitchen, and we say, well, we're not gonna include that in the project, and we're not gonna include any of the cost of the appliances or any improvements in the kitchen. And then once this project is complete and it's federal government's satisfied and their fingers are out of it, we may go back in and say, well, now let's remodel the kitchen and make the improvements that we wanted, but we'll use general fund dollars that aren't encumbered by the Davis-Bacon Act. So we might get more bang for our dollar that way.
I guess I understand, and I appreciate that, and I think it's a worthwhile project, and I'm anxious to
Yeah,
get it
we're
done.
all behind the
I
notion.
just want to, I think we all want to ensure that we have a clear understanding of where we're at from a financial commitment and what we're gonna end up with.
Yeah, and that'll all come back before the board.
Great.
But Mr. Newmer, if we were to approve this, do you have some idea of the timeline of when you might be back before us with a bid? Because you'd be back to discuss a bid document that this board would approve, I assume.
I was just gonna say, the county can't approve contracts to go out until after July 1st, so.
Okay.
We can't release any bid documents until after then.
Right, we will be working with the architect though to finalize the design and take it from the concept plans to something that we can really build. And during that process, I've been asking him all along to update the cost estimate as he went along. He took a look at what you had originally, and he said, I think you're up around 280 with this plan, and a lot of it had to do with the foundation work and
The
things
trusses.
that
Yep.
were required because of the roofing. I've already seen one iteration of the architect's plans that he submitted to me and said, hey, here's some ideas, this is what I want to do. And the first thing I said to him was, before I just give this to the township, what's the cost? So I know if we're in the ballpark or not. So I'm working with him to kind of get those things refined, and when we get some of those ideas nailed down and we're in the ballpark of where we need to be cost-wise, we'll be bringing those plans back and presenting them to you.
Okay. But this is something that we would presumably be able to still source this year and proceed with? Right, okay. Any other board comment? Hearing none, we've got a motion by Mr. Tominello with support by Mr. Brado to contract with Wade Trim for the design, engineering, bidding, and construction management services for the Tucker Senior Expansion Project at a cost of $25,250. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you,
Nay.
Board. Oh, okay. Next on the agenda, item D1, appointments. The agenda actually lists 12 appointments to the Fire Services Assessment Committee. There's actually a list of 11 attached. So board members, at our April 13th, 2015 regular board meeting, the Board of Trustees approved the formation of a Fire Services Assessment Committee for the purpose of reviewing the operations, budget, and service levels of our fire department and making recommendations to the Board of Trustees. It was agreed that members will be recruited and appointed by the Board of Trustees at a later date. I believe at the time I'd said I didn't think I could have it for the next meeting, but I made a commitment I would try to have that in the following meeting, which is this evening. I felt it also important that the board have a clear understanding or set of objectives for this committee, and I did my best to draft what I believe that would be, but certainly, you know, it's before the board because I'm looking for the board to, you know, basically approve the objectives as well as the appointees to the committee. So I gave a little bit of a background of where we are today in terms of the funding and negotiations and so forth with our fire department. I listed what I believe to be 3 questions that we would ask this committee of citizens to answer. And number 1 is regarding our current operations. Are there any ways which the current operations can be altered in order to reduce expenses without reducing service? So, you know, does this committee come up with proposals or suggestions on changes that we might make both to our operations or to our funding, so that we say, with what we're doing, you know, you can do a better job. Why don't you look at this model done in another community? So that'd be one thing that we'd be asking this committee. That's where the value, I believe, the value of having some people in fire services is important. Number 2 is the level of service. How does the level of service that we provide compare to other communities in our area? And do we have an excessive level of service, an adequate, or a low level of service that's being provided currently? And then number 3, possible solutions. What are possible actions that the Board of Trustees can take to close the budget deficit? Ultimately, the deliverable that I perceive is that we'd be asking this fire committee to supply answers to the questions, as well as any other suggestions to maintain or improve service while operating within, not necessarily within the budget, but with a modest surplus. You know, I think it's responsible to say that we want to be in a situation where the fire fund is growing for the purposes of equipment replacement, not necessarily breaking even, or certainly not operating at a deficit. The list of proposed appointees is at the bottom of the list of objectives. I'm proposing myself and Mr. Battanti. He expressed an interest in serving on the committee. Chief Lopez, 2 of our firefighters, Matt Sarr is a firefighter, and he's also a representative of the firefighters union. Jason Groth is a battalion chief. That's the highest rank that our firefighters can achieve, and he also happens to be a resident of the township. I would stop there and say that those 5 people, and Mr. Paul Bailey, who is our auditor, he's a CPA and an auditor of the township, maybe that as a 6th, would be, I guess, sort of informational representatives on that committee. If I knew the answer to number 1, hey, there's something we can do to reduce our current, change our current operations to save a substantial sum of money, I would have brought it forward. And I believe the chief would have done the same, and if Paul Bailey knew of something we were doing wrong, he'd have probably told us by now. So I see our role as kind of more of one that's informational, maybe doing some legwork on behalf of this committee. Not to say that we don't have input, but we're close to this issue. We've been talking about it for years. But then there are some additional people on this committee that I believe would add a different value. Dave Frederick is the fire chief for the city of Warren, and he's also a resident of our township. Dan Hagan was the East Point fire chief. He's retired. He is also a resident of the township. John Shapka is a township resident. He's the Macomb County Corporate Counsel, and say the head attorney for the county. He's spent a significant part of his career prior to Macomb County working in the city of Detroit, and was involved in a lot of the issues with their unions and things like that. So he definitely has experience in the municipal environment. John Swadish is retired from SMART. He was the deputy general manager for the administration of the SMART bus system. He is also a resident. When I'd asked people throughout the community for recommendations, John's name came up repeatedly. And then last on the list, 2 individuals from SEMCOG, Dave Berger and Ray Riggs. Actually, Ray Riggs works for Dave Berger. Dave Berger's role is efficiency and collaboration. So they regularly provide this kind of service and financial guidance to other municipalities. And Dave had said that he has a lot of data relative to comparables and financial data, assembled from, all the communities in a pretty large region throughout Metro Detroit and really beyond. But that specifically, Ray Riggs is retired from the fire service, so he's the fellow that's usually involved when the discussion about efficiency and collaboration centers around fire services. Both of these individuals provided assistance back in, I think it was 2011, when we looked at any kind of a shared services arrangement with the city of Mount Clemens. They had a lot of information, a lot of data they could provide and analysis. So those would be the people that I would propose appointing to the committee. So I wanted to make sure that we had an idea or some agreement, or maybe this isn't what this board wants, but what questions we want answered and who we want to work on the committee, and give us some sort of an answer back. So I don't know if there's any input, if there's suggestions from this board or a motion, I'm not sure.
Well, like I said last week, not to get into a 20-minute discussion, I know I've sat in meetings and we've answered all of these questions, and I'm not even gonna get into that debate tonight, but I think everybody on this board, after going through the arbitration and contracts, I've been through a couple, the board's been through a few. We know the issues at the fire department. I think we know the answers to these questions. We know what we have to do, and I think we're just dropping the ball to this committee so they can come back and offer political cover on one of 2 items. Either we're gonna lay off firemen, or we're gonna go out for something north of $1 million for a tax increase. Those are really our 2 options. And that's it. And the committee can meet and do whatever, but those are really the options at the end of the day. And we're kidding ourselves if we think otherwise.
Well, so let me expound on that. I don't disagree with a lot of what you say. I think I agree that certainly I know that there's 2 ways that this gap can be closed. One would be through layoffs. The other would be through an increase in revenue, which is largely through the millage rate. I don't relish the thought of asking voters to approve an additional millage or asking them, and I don't relish the thought of laying people off. And before I might ask this board to consider either one of those things, I really want to truly make sure, I have no problem in taking, I don't know what we suggested, 60 days, 90 days, taking some period of time, asking other people for their input and advice. Because the one thing that I do know is, through the negotiation and arbitration process, I spend a lot of time, sometimes us and them.
We spent a lot of time with documents, files and files and files.
Testimony,
And
everything.
I will say, especially you, myself, and Mr. Witt, I think we know a whole heck of a lot about our fire department and everybody else within Metro Detroit.
Right.
I mean, our knowledge, I think, has been greatly expanded because of that arbitration.
I'm not sitting here today thinking that these people, and I've said this before, I don't think anyone on this committee is gonna find $1 million in the couch cushions that we didn't know was there. What I'm saying though is before I might consider either of those two things, neither of which I don't wanna talk about layoffs, and I don't wanna talk about asking for a tax increase. But I likely have to do one of those things, at least. But before I might consider that, I wanna make sure that we've reviewed every possible thing. And no one on this committee is asking for compensation. There's no cost to this township. Whatever suggestion they might have, if the best thing for this board to do is layoffs, we know that we spend the most in overtime through the summer months. The majority of the overtime, or a large percentage of the majority of the overtime occurs through the summer months. So it wouldn't be logical for us to do layoffs during the time when we have a lot of, I don't want to say transient residents, but certainly a lot of additional people visiting the township and an increased number of calls at the same time that some guys want to take time off because their kids are out of school. So layoffs don't seem to be something that we would want to consider in the next 90 days. And we certainly don't have the opportunity to ask voters to consider a millage for the next 90 days. So if we have some time, I believe it makes sense, and I agree with you. I don't think they're gonna come back with something that's crazy out of left field.
I mean, I'd be surprised.
I would be
I
surprised.
mean, I'd like to see it, but
But knowing that that we're talking about people that are, serving as fire chiefs, I mean, that's a position of authority. There's some inherent knowledge there. Attorneys that have worked both at the county level and for the city of Detroit, I mean, I think there's some value, there's some knowledge. And maybe someone sees something a little bit different than us. I think there's value in finding that out. Getting some input from SEMCOG so that this board is as informed as possible when they might consider either of those options. And I just think it's worth that investment in time.
Mr. Supervisor, I've heard the notion before that the answers are there and we know what to do. And I have to tell you, and maybe it's because I've been on the board a lesser amount of time, I'm not comfortable making a recommendation or voting on an option without this type of expert input. We talk about layoffs. Well, I look at it more in terms of how we deliver the service. I mean, what other models are out there that can be used? And how much do those models cost? And I think this kind of a group can tell us that. So I don't think it's as straightforward as lay somebody off. I don't want to make that decision based on the dollars. I want to make a decision based on what are appropriate types of coverage models that provide the proper amount of public safety for our residents. There is not a more important subject. And the other thing is this deals with the financial stability of the township. I think those two are our utmost responsibilities. And to take 60 days and have a group of individuals sit down and help us think through that and put down on paper what other coverage models might look like, models that are successful in other communities. I think that's absolutely time well spent. I do not think it's got to do with political coverage. At least not for me, it doesn't. It has to do with understanding what are appropriate options for public safety, and what do those options cost. And I do not, and it's been mentioned before about political coverage, and I absolutely do not agree with that.
And I would-
to take 60 days to, this problem has been going on for years.
Correct.
To take another 60 days to look at that and provide residents with a well-thought-out set of options, and it may not be revolutionary or groundbreaking, but at least we will have gone through the due diligence of asking experts, asking the people that do the job, asking people that live in our community for their points of view on how we might handle this, is, I think, our responsibility.
And that's fine that you feel that way, Bill, and certainly after being on the board for 8 months, that's great, but I've been here 10 years, and quite honestly, I've talked to most of these people that are on this list at some point in my career, and we've talked to East Point, we know what the East Point, I do, we know the East Point model because that was one of the big comparables. They have the same amount of firemen. I know all about East Point, and I guess I'm just in a different place in my knowledge of how this all works. But, you know, yeah, it's been building since right about 2008. You know, when you do a deficit, when you freely say, I'm gonna spend an extra $500,000 every year for the last 3 years out of your budget, and you have a $2 million budget, that's what happens.
It's naive
know?
to say that the problem started in 2008.
Well, it
This is a
did.
problem, no.
Oh, it did.
The
Go
problem
look at the
started,
budget.
the problem started in 2000 and before, when we made contracts that we couldn't fulfill in the end, or we didn't know how we were gonna fulfill those 20 years down the road when, you know, everything came home to roost, you know? And this, yeah, there are two options, but I don't know what the fire department looks like with less people. I don't know what it looks like with more people, whatever the recommendations are.
Discussed it with the chief. I'm
Well,
not gonna
hold
go
on,
into all
hold on.
those discussions here, but I think we've already had that discussion. I know,
All right, Darren,
At
if we
least
go, if
you,
we go
Adam,
down
and
three
I
people, how
have,
do
but
we
I'm
run
not
fire
gonna-
department?
I'm not gonna get into all that, but we did have that discussion.
But as a board, we don't know that answer.
Well, I think it's fair to say that you feel comfortable
That's
that
fine.
the
Do
committee
your
isn't.
committee. Great.
That's
Go.
what-
I said I wasn't gonna argue it, and everybody's just arguing. I said I was making a comment, and that's great. Do your committee.
Okay, is there a motion?
I would just like to say, you know, on paper, these committee members, it looks like a great group of people. I mean, there are a lot of residents, a lot of fire chief, a lot of fire experience. I commend you for the list, and hopefully it works out as well as the list portrays itself on paper.
Well, I got to a certain point where I ran into two problems. One was, and I'll say this, I would love somebody at home who happens to be, you know, involved in a large corporation in our area or a large, small business owner to say, I want to serve. The problem that I found is I found people who had a knowledge and an interest of this process within government. And I was not able to locate someone from the private sector. I would like to have that. I would truly like to have, you know, the CEO of a corporation or someone who manages, you know, this kind of a budget to serve. But you know, I also understand that someone who has an inherent knowledge and history with fire service from a neighboring community probably brings a perspective or a chance to, you know, share some candid information that we might not otherwise get. I don't want this in any way to be misinterpreted as any measure against the chief, but this board relies a lot on the chief, and I think he's done an excellent job. But I like to hear from maybe another chief, and if, you know, just to make sure we've turned over that stone to find out if there's another perspective.
But with that said, I'd like to make a motion to appoint the following people to the Fire Service Assessment Committee for the attached list.
All right, we got a motion by Mr. Capro, is there support?
Support.
Support by Mr. Brado. All right, we beat it up pretty good here, let's open up the floor for public
That
comment.
really wasn't my intent.
William Barrell. I agree with Mr. York. I also agree with Mr. Batani. One thing I want to tell you, and everybody in your departments, especially you guys, the big three there, as managers, you know where you can make money. You know where you're losing money. You know. And our fire chief, now, I don't know if he's in the same union and he buys, and you guys buy into the same benefit package, but in the skilled trades, you may have a superintendent or general foreman and a foreman who's in the same union, but he's management. You're always going to have a little squabble between the rank and file and your management. Your management has to do justice for your customer and your general contractor. We are the general contractor to the fire department. Our fire chief knows where he can cut costs. Okay? Now, I know he might have ran into problems with the rank and file before, then magically, all of a sudden, there's no more problems. I don't know what happened. Maybe he got a slap on the wrist, but he knows where he can cut costs. And I know there's at least one accountant up on this board. And I want to say this. If Mr. Semstock from the private sector, big man on campus at General Motors, wants to come in and sit in for free on this fire department board, why not? Okay? Maybe he's got some background and some engineering background. And I know, like I said, we got at least one accountant up here. I do like the idea that we're not paying for these guys to come up there. But I do agree with Mr. York, but I also agree with Mr. Batoni. But as managers, you guys know, and we know, and you guys know where you can cut costs. You know where you can make money, that's why you're managers. You know where you can make money, you know where you can make time, you know where you're not making money. And our fire chief was at odds with his rank and file at one point, and all of a sudden he's not. When you cross over into the management line, your job is to do justice for your general contractor, which is the township, which we pay. So he has to do justice. He can also keep his rank and file happy and follow the union rules, but he knows where we can save the money. Okay? There's no doubt about it. You're a manager, you know. So whatever thing you got to come up with, hocus pocus, you can do it. Okay? And if Mr. Semstock wants to be on that board, I think we should amend that and put him on that board and let him sit on that. Now, sometimes you may not like his style, but the guy's got a heart bigger than Manhattan. And the guy, I think Mr. Semstock can help out on this board. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Justin Mouton, 36350 Jefferson. I don't know what's right and what's wrong in this subject. I got a few ideas. You know, if you guys like them, you don't. That's how it's gonna go. But I know in 2016, from what I hear, these guys got a contract coming up. I know there's been plenty of fire. My cousin works for Flemington Hills. He's a fireman. He's had pay cuts. I brought it up before. You guys said, no, we don't have any control over that. I don't know who's got control over that, but it seems like if that's going to be a feasible solution to the problem, I mean, why not? You know, nobody wants a pay cut, but the economy has gotten bad. It's starting to make a little bit of a rise. I think that would be one of the best ways to go about it. Also, this probably could never happen, but it's just an idea. How about you directly connect it to the DDA? You got money in that fund that the DDA is going to skim off the top. Okay, take that money, say a percentage of that, or whatever you think might help in the future. If this DDA gets going, goes towards that fire, so we can get it back up on scale the way you guys want it, instead of just saying the DDA has the option to do that or not. You know. And also, I've heard comments before about excessive things in the firehouse that taxpayers have paid for, like TVs and lounges and stuff like that. I don't know how true that is, but if that is true, it seems ridiculous. I mean, these guys, you want them to be in shape, you want them to be well rested if something goes down, if a fire goes down, okay. You want your workout benches, you want your equipment to do the drills so they can do what they gotta do and be prepared and ready. You want a good, a nice bed, that way if they're gonna lay down, you know, and be rested for if we do have a fire, okay, not something that's gonna hurt their back. Chairs the same, Posturepedic, whatever. That stuff makes sense, but not TV and lounges and ridiculous things like that. And also, something that's not pertaining to this, is I have a few other questions and concerns regarding something before in this agenda, and a concern that has nothing to do with any of this. So before we adjourn, hopefully I get a chance to come up again.
Yep.
and
Yep,
say
we'll have a
this.
public comment session at the end of the meeting for anything.
Okay,
All right?
thank you.
Thank you.
Jim Senstock, 31698 San Juan. Just commenting on the gentleman's suggestion, I did offer my services. I was a corporate industrial engineer. I did efficiency studies for every plant in General Motors. So, you know what? Fire department doesn't make no difference. Looking at a budget doesn't make no difference. But I'm gonna let that go. I'm looking at this list of people here. And Darren said it, and I fully concur with it. It's a cover. It's a cover for you guys. Of the 12 people that are listed here, and there are 12 listed, so your agenda was right. Of the 12 people that are listed, 10 of them, no, I'm sorry, 8 of them are directly connected with the fire department. Now, at least 4 of them are part of the problem. They've been part of the problem. So I'm looking at, and I understand, Mr. Battani, I understand your position because you haven't been here that long. So I was originally going to criticize you, but I'll give you the benefit of the doubt and let you get on that committee and see what's going on. But to have Ken on there, to have Mike Lopez on there, the chief, he hasn't done anything. He hasn't proposed anything. If he has, it hasn't come out in the public. He's managed to put the fire department $200,000 in the hole, and that's probably stretching it. I think it's a lot more than that. Matt Saar is the vice president of the union. He was one of the most adamant negotiators of the union. Jason Groth, he's a battalion chief, but you guys should all understand, they're all part of the brotherhood. The brothers. Brother firemen, brother this, brother that. And you know what? I'm not sure about the 2 chiefs, but I'll tell you what, more than likely they came up through the ranks too. And Mr. Riggs, you said he came up through the ranks. So you know what? What do I expect to get out of those people? Nothing. Other than cover for a tax increase. You guys sat here at the last meeting and put a secretary there. Geez, you think any one of those people is going to say get rid of the secretary? There ain't a single one there that'll do that. You got John Schweitosh on there. He's been on every committee in the township. He's been on the DDA. He's on the DDA. Now you put him on this one. He was on the Economic Development Committee. He's a yes man. Plain and simple. I've sat in on his meetings. You aren't going to get anything here. Not a thing. You aren't asking any of the citizens what their thoughts are. They're citizens, but they're firemen first. And that's the problem. I'm saving this piece of paper because you know what? We're going to see how these people all vote. Also, I'd like you to know when these meetings are. Are they going to be public and posted? Because they are required to be under the Open Meetings Act. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that is a good point. There's really no pure citizen person on here, but.
Okay, seeing no other public comment, we'll close the floor for public comment and move back to board comment. A couple of points. One of the questions was asked, is the fire chief in the same union as the firefighters? The fire chief is really serves at the will of the board. He has a contract, he's certainly an employee of the township, but he's not in a bargaining unit. Other than health care, he doesn't receive the same benefits. The firefighters have a pension, fire chief does not receive a pension, so it wouldn't be safe to say that he has the same level of benefits, and he's certainly not in the same union. There was a comment about TVs and lounges. The township doesn't provide that. We certainly provide certain equipment, like the beds, for example. Those are things we provide, but TVs and lounges are not a budgeted item. It's not something the township
We
pays for.
paid for them. We did pay for them. I did sign a check. Absolutely, we did.
And the Barco lounges.
Yeah, 5 years ago.
I wouldn't say our fire department's extravagant by
No, I
any
didn't say that,
means.
but I was
No.
just saying we did pay for
I
the,
mean, they said lunchroom tables with their laptops and the cords running everywhere. It's not really
No,
extravagant over
no,
there.
well, I don't recall it. It might had to be more than 5 years ago, because I was not on the board when that came across.
I think Mike Royce was still on the board, so.
So that was before my time. In the 6.5 years
I'm-
I've been on this
I'm-
board,
I'm-
I haven't
I'm-
approved
I'm just
that.
saying that we did, in fact, buy the furniture there.
Well, okay.
If you agree with it or not, doesn't.
No,
really
I'm
matter.
not, I'm not disagreeing it. I've been, in 6 years, the 6.5 years, that issue has not come across, for me.
Probably
so.
need to buy new ones.
I would say we
actually.
probably do, because I've seen the TV over there, and it's one of those old gigantic TVs that was from like the 80s or 90s. It's pretty
Yes.
old.
And then public meetings, yeah, this is no, this is a public process. There's no inherent advantage to not having it as open as possible. You know, so, yeah, the meetings will be posted, and at this point, I can't say where they'll be held or what schedule they are. Each of the individuals, when they confirmed their willingness to serve, said, give me some ideas on dates. I'm assuming that, everybody wants to take a look and say, well, I'm available at this time of the day or evening or this particular day of the week, so we haven't established that. We probably will through some email chain, but the meetings will be posted and public. Those are at least were the notes that I had, so, any other board comments?
Mr. Supervisor, I generally agree with the questions that were outlined there, but I'll go back to a comment made about the distinction between some of the fire experts and the non-experts on the committee. I think it's going to be critical for us to frame the issues, and while I generally agree with what's indicated there, I think part of our role is to make sure that we ask the right questions. So as we get direction from the experts, that that we are there to frame, to frame those questions.
Right, that was to my point, saying that I don't see that you or I, the chief or the two firefighters or our auditor, are necessarily, I don't wanna say that I'm not there to provide input. I mean, I'm certainly not gonna serve on a board and refuse to provide input. But I'm expecting to get something out of this, and I feel that I'm a representative knowing that if the deliverable, if this committee starts to steer in a direction whereby the deliverable is not what this board is looking for, I think it's our role to say, hey, we're looking for this kind of information, this sort of feedback. So, and again, these questions, I felt it appropriate to in the board packet, publicly say what we hope to do, but also to this board to say what the questions are that we're hoping to have answered. I visualized having these people, and when I'd said 11, Dave Berger said that he would appear at a meeting or two, but that ultimately Ray would be the person that was there. But I wanted to make sure that I put both of their names down so that there wasn't someone from SEMCOG that wasn't coming. There was another person on the list that initially agreed and then later asked to be removed from the list, so that was why there was an issue of 12 versus 11. But I see our role as kind of, making sure that whatever we get is what this board is looking for, and these were the general questions I think I'd ask.
Okay.
The committee may evolve and say, maybe we'd like to answer that in a different way, and that's okay too.
Understood.
So, any other discussion? Hearing none, we have a motion by Mr. Capro with support by Mr. Brado to appoint the following people to the Fire Services Assessment Committee. There's a list of 11, or as the resident pointed out, there's actually a 12th person there in the board packet. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Nay.
Motion carries. Thank you, board. Next on our agenda is item, oh,
Public comment.
yeah, it's not on there.
Public
It
comment.
popped,
It fell off.
it fell off. So, next item on the agenda will be public comment. We'll, you can comment on anything you'd like, and that's a 5-minute limit.
All right, William Barr, what I wanted to say is, I hope we do ask the right questions to the fire chief. And I do believe that the fire chief knows how we can save money. And if he doesn't know, then there's something wrong. I also wanted to say that the fire department clerk does not do the ambulance billing. I know there's been a comment last week that the ambulance billing was behind. The ambulance billing is subbed out to, I think, MON or something. There's a subcontractor there. So, department secretary does not do that. I want to comment on that cell tower. Township purchased a 155-acre parcel in 2007 to protect the wetland and provide recreational opportunities for the community. Are we still going to do that, or are we going to be in the cell tower business? You can put this cell tower on top of any building you want. You can put it on top of that old building out there where the Lance Cruz building. You can put that on top of any building and have cell tower. Also, they can make cell towers that look like trees. A cell tower, you don't have to have a 60 by 60 parcel. You can have a 40 by 40. You can have those outbuildings look like little farms, and you can have the fences wrought iron that poke you. You know, you can have wrought iron, decorative wrought iron. You can have a cell tower look like a tree. Also, this gas station that Kroger wants to put in, looking for a cool, trendy downtown, you know, you could put a coffee shop in there that plays folk music, you know, cool, trendy downtown, yuppie stuff. A microbrewery, an art gallery, a fish and tackle shop, a vintage clothing store, you know, that sells maybe European cut suits or handmade suits, Louis the Hatter, or a handcraft made in the USA store. Gas station is not walkable or have a nautical theme. You could maybe put in a finished pasty shop. You try to be like Royal Oak, something edgy and trendy or something, and we put in a Shell gas station. I'm not seeing it. You could put a handmade duck whittling store there or something, where you hand whittle ducks or something, duck decoys but a gas station. So that's all we get. We get a gas station, a walkable gas station. So to me, that's not a walkable downtown. And also, the HCMA agreed to quote the work approximately 20% lower for the median and for the landscaping along Metropolitan Parkway and along the bike path and so forth. I haven't seen this higher level of maintenance. I haven't seen this higher level yet, so I'm still waiting. I'll try to be patient. I'll bite my tongue, and I haven't seen any weed whackers come out there yet, so I'm wondering if we're gonna wait till the ragweed season comes and we got 3 foot of ragweed over the curb, and that Metropolitan Parkway in Crocker looks like a garbage dump over there. So I'm looking for that better that higher level. I haven't seen that yet. So I'm not ready, just yet to put on my orange vest and pull garbage out of those sewers over there and weed whack. So I wonder if they can do their job, since they got a 300% raise for cutting their own lawn. Wonder if they can do the job and get this higher level of maintenance and lawn cutting and weed whacking over there at Metropolitan Parkway and Crocker. Thank you.
Thank you.
Justin Mouton, 36530 Jefferson. I got a few questions that I asked earlier that you didn't really touch on, I don't believe, and if you could, I'd appreciate it. The first one, you may not have seen that it was something that was really relevant, but if it's not, I'd like you to let me know. The 2016 contract for the firemen coming up, is there any way that they actually possibly could get a pay cut? Not that I want anybody to get a pay cut, but it's happening all over, especially in the private sector. And a lot of the private sector are mad because, you know, government workers aren't getting it, but everybody else is getting it. They're like, you know, come on, the whole world's going down. You know, why don't you do your part? And I don't know if you guys have any power over that, or maybe can talk to somebody who does have power over that, somebody that's in your circle that you know, or, you know, associate. Also, the DDA, connecting the fire station to the DDA, the finances, that's something else you didn't touch on. I was at a citizens committee, and we brought this up with Adam, and from Wade Trim, and he says that historically, DDAs have helped out fire stations and township, I don't know what you want to call it, but fire stations and stuff like that, but they don't have to, you know? It's a decision that the DDA board makes, and even if you can't make it in print in a contract, inside a contract that says we have to do this, you're on the DDA. If anything, last resort, you can just recommend it. Say, how about we do this? What do you think of it? That's something at least. And one of the questions I wanted you to ask about the DDA that you didn't get to, I was talking about the degrading, and is that the reason that the DDA was made, the degrading of the district? And you went on to talk about, we didn't send it into the state yet. I think there was a little confusion of what the actual question is. I'm not really concerned if you sent it into the state, or when you're going to do that, or if you haven't done it. But I would like to know the reason of the DDA. Is it because of the degrading of the area? And if it is something else, like maybe you just wanted to make it a downtown district, a downtown area, I'd like to know that too. And something that has nothing to do with anything that anybody talked about today. I know some of the marinas on the water, for the business, they kill all the weeds. Fishing is a big tourist part of this community. I know that if it wasn't something that made money, nobody would probably ever do anything about it. But it is. We got the bass tournaments, the fish habitat is important. Like marinas like Beacon Cove, you could tell that they dump so much weed killer into the waters that it spews out and kills a large portion of the lake, which could be fish habitat. You know, those weeds grow out there, and it cools down the lake, and it's important for the fish habitat, and I think that's one of the major reasons why fishing has gone down. I mean, we still have our good years, but back in the day, you can talk to the old timers, every year was a good year. And I wonder if there's something that you can do about that, or maybe talk to somebody that you know, an associate of yours, to maybe get something done about that. Like, for instance, close down the marina for a week, put a gate up so no water gets in or no water gets out. You know, have that chemical do its job, and then open the marina, and hopefully it's well off enough, just like you're not supposed to walk on your grass after you fertilize it, something like that. Or just use mechanical ways, or dredge it out deeper. There's a few things that they could do. Some of them cost more money than others, but You know, that's a big concern of mine. That is all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jim Sunstock, 31698 San Juan. There's a couple things that I wanted to talk about. When we were talking about the senior center, there was a big elaborate speech concerning everything but answering the actual question. And the question that I had, as opposed to the citizen that didn't really care to listen to a whole spiel on what CDGB funds are, is why didn't you go out and bid the services that you said that Mr. whatever his name is. Newmer. Thank you. That Mr. Newmer was going to do. There are many, many companies that do that same work. There are many, many companies that can go out and do your interviews. There are many, many companies that can go find out whether or not you're paying prevailing wage or not. There are people that can do that. So why didn't you go ask and see how much they would charge you for those services? Especially when the service that you got ran up over 10% of our funds. And then you're talking about, well, maybe we'll take some money out of the general fund. You know what? Again, you don't see what's going on, or you don't care. It's not your money. There's only one person up there that votes no when it comes to saving the township's money, Mr. York. The rest of you vote like you're little automatrons. Yes, 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 just like that. As far as the gas station that's going to go in the DDA, fortunately, it does have to go to the planning commission, so we'll get our chance at them at the planning commission. But the DDA should be weighing in on that. They should be making a statement to the planning commission whether or not they support that. Because if they support that, right now you can't drive down at Crocker and Jefferson on a Saturday morning. You can't even get down there. And other days of the week, it's just as bad. And if you put a gas station there, you'll have the dubious distinction of having the only gas station that fronts up against residential. Everything else fronts up against commercial in this township. Lastly, I just wanted to make one final comment on our fire department committee. You didn't do anything to correct the imbalance, but it should be, everybody should know in the audience, since it doesn't really impact you guys, you don't listen anyhow, that the people that are directly tied to the fire department represent over 66% of that committee. Again, I'll say it. What do you expect them to tell you? You didn't go to Clinton Township, get somebody from Clinton Township, get a retired Clinton Township guy. Or how about Mount Clemens? Let's find out why they use MedStar. Why every community in this area uses MedStar except the Cadillac of the fire departments, Harrison Township. Why? When you have your own ambulance service, you have to buy the ambulances, you have to cover the overtime when they're out doing one of those runs. Why don't we do it the way the other communities do it? None of these people are going to suggest that. None of them. I've talked to some of them. I've talked to SEMCOG. I've dealt with SEMCOG out on the fire department when we were trying to put that in years ago. Again, it comes back to one basic philosophy of this board. with one exception. We don't care. We want more money to play with. We want a bigger tax increase. You're not gonna get that tax increase. So you better come up with another way to save the money.
Thank you. Seeing no other public comment, we'll close the floor for public comment and move back to board comment. I'll do my best to answer the questions and, I'm sorry?
Did you want to speak, sir? No, thank you. Oh, all right. Okay. I didn't recognize you, so.
So I'll do my best, and I apologize if I missed some questions earlier and I didn't provide an answer. There was a comment about the ambulance billing. I think the resident was referring to Acumed. Acumed is a company that we contract with that does the billing for our ambulance services. However, there is information that we have to give to Acumed. I suppose it'd be not unlike maybe the way Blue Cross or certain other medical services provide information. There is information that comes from the clerical person that's required for certain Medicaid billing and Medicare billing. We have to go through a quality assurance process per the Medical Control Board. So there's a number of steps of things that we need to do, but one of those steps is Acumed, ultimately, that does the collections and so on and so forth. In 2007, one resident pointed out that we purchased 155 acres, and one of the reasons for purchasing that land was for recreational opportunities. Since 2007, this board or prior boards have done nothing to create recreational opportunities, with the exception of recently applying for a grant for $300,000 to make some improvements to enhance the recreational opportunities. Had we received that grant, we would be back before this board asking for $100,000 to be able to provide match monies so that the work could be done. So one of the challenges clearly that this board and prior boards have faced is where do we find the money to help create the recreational opportunities on that 155 acres. It seems to me that dedicating a 60 by 60 footprint in the far western corner, almost out on a peninsula on this property, would give us that opportunity to have some funding that could be used as reinvestment back into the property for those recreational opportunities. There was a comment made about the potential that the buildings can have a certain style and that decorative fencing can be constructed. Ultimately, that responsibility falls on the Planning Commission. When this board agreed as a property owner to establish a relationship with the cell company, we said you have the right now to go to the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission is the body that has some of that oversight regarding fencing and appearance and so forth. So I feel confident that the Planning Commission, being empowered to do that, can address issues regarding aesthetics. There was a couple comments made regarding the gas station and how would a gas station serve the area versus a coffee shop or a bait and tackle store. Make sure we all understand. The waterfront redevelopment plan from our planner didn't say we need a gas station there. No board member here said we need a gas station. 3 property owners entered into, on their own, an arrangement whereby they'd be willing to sell their property to Kroger if Kroger wants to put a gas station in there. There will be a time and a place to have the discussion or deliberation on the merits of that gas station. And I won't speak for any board member here, but when that time comes, I'll be presented with a set of plans and I'll have my opportunity to share my opinion. But I think it's premature for me to voice my opinion on that and run the risk that something I say now leads to some problem in future litigation. So when that issue comes before me, which, as I understand it, big step in that process is rezoning. Planning Commission is going to hear that issue next week. Yes. Planning Commission gives a recommendation at some point in that process to this board, and this board then will be faced with that. And as a deliberative body, I'll be more than happy to share my comments about that proposal then. But I think it's premature for me to do so because I haven't been asked to do that, and I don't want to say something or take some sort of action now in a deliberative process prematurely. But it's coming. HCMA, we have had some discussions, very preliminary discussions about the maintenance. I know they did a cleanup this week in terms of picking up trash and doing that sort of thing. But certainly it's important that we maintain that line of communication because certainly one of the objectives we had was an increased level of maintenance along the Metro Parkway corridor. One resident had said we didn't address the issue. The current contract with the firefighters is set to expire December 31st of 2016. And so the question was, why not a pay cut? Well, I can tell you that throughout the negotiation process with our firefighters, we had, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say, a countless number of proposals to try to save money. It's a matter of fact that the union never provided one economic proposal. So they wanted to talk about working conditions. They never said, well, here's one way we could save money. Here's an economic proposal. This is a matter of record within the arbitration. When an employer, Harrison Township, and a union that's a public safety union, police and fire, when they can't come to an agreement, and when we say, well, we need a cut, here's the numbers. And if the firefighters through the negotiating process say, we're unwilling to accept any cut, then we must go to arbitration, and it's a binding arbitration per state law. We make our argument before an arbitrator. The arbitrator listens to both sides. He can't split the baby, so to speak. So if we say we want everyone to take a 5% cut, and the firefighters say we want a 5% pay increase, he either chooses a 5% cut or a 5% increase. He can't choose zero. That's the law. And because of that, it becomes very, very difficult to negotiate. And in essence, what happens is a big, big part of our budget is dependent on who is chosen as the arbitrator. Now, I don't want to mispaint or misrepresent the circumstance. In 2011, the firefighters did negotiate. They accepted several cuts. And we were able to negotiate that. When it came to this contract, the firefighters were clearly unwilling to accept cuts. So we went through that arbitration process. It was very lengthy. It took us the better part of a year. It was very costly because it involves a lot of legal steps and testimony and so forth. And it cost us a lot of time. Darren, Adam, myself spent the better part of last year, a big portion of our time was spent going through that arbitration. I can't tell you what negotiations are going to be like next year as we approach this contract. What I do know is we did everything we could, both from the negotiation process as well as the arbitration process, to reduce the cost of labor. But if we sit across the table and we ask for concessions and the firefighters refuse to give them, the only option available for us to try to get those concessions is through binding arbitration. There was a question asked, the fire station funding through the DDA, can it be done? We've discussed all along that the DDA can agree to either change the level of capture from the fire department or can agree to help fund that fire department. Right now, we do not, in our budget, have a line item to contribute to retiree health care for future retirees. We talked about a number of at least $200,000 a year. So there's $200,000 we're not putting in the bank. There's $200,000 in deficit by our latest estimates. That's $400,000. We're capturing about $4,000 by a rough estimate of the firefighters, of revenue that might go to the firefighters. So if we took all $4,000 and put it back, we still have $396,000 we need to make up. So I didn't mean to ignore your question or to say that the DDA can't do it, but worrying about the funds captured by the DDA, the $4,000, is minuscule compared to our need. We're looking at $400,000 to $500,000 need in the budget to close this gap, not a $4,000 gap. So I didn't mean to discount that suggestion, but this is a problem bigger than the DDA. It's bigger than fundraising. We're not going to close this gap that way. This is a large structural issue. The question was asked, why was the DDA founded? And I instead referred to the question about whether or not what we told the state. So I'm going to read here from the ordinance that this board adopted to create the Downtown Development Authority. Section 2, determination of necessity and purpose. The Township Board hereby determines that it is necessary for the best interest of the public to create a public body corporate which shall operate to, number 1, increase property tax valuation where possible in the business district of the township. That was the number 1 reason that we stated in our ordinance to establish this. To increase property tax valuation where possible in the business district of township. The second item in the ordinance was to promote economic growth. And then the third was to halt property value deterioration. So those were the 3 reasons that we listed in the ordinance when we adopted that. So to answer your question, what did the board intend by adopting the DDA? It's in the ordinance. We adopted it by ordinance and by resolution ultimately. Close marinas for a week. There was some discussion, that was the note that I took, clean water. Water quality issues aren't unique to Harrison Township. They're really not necessarily even unique to Lake St. Clair, although obviously Lake St. Clair